Hello and welcome to the Cultured Bumpkin. If you're new here, I love literature. I'm a voice actor, and when I'm not doing commercials and stuff, I am doing classic literature, narrating it, uploading it for free for your listening pleasure and for people that, students, educators, trying to make the classics accessible. And one way I do that is in Southern accents and things like that. But anyway, I do read a lot, and this I got this complete short stories of Ernest Hemingway. When I was in Key Largo, which he used to hang out in the Keys a lot, and my brother and I went down there to learn to sail, and it was a lot of fun. And when we were down there, I picked up that. Thought it's a fun place to buy it, but you can get it on Amazon or whatever. I've been reading this, and I'm enjoying his writing style. It's very minimal, as opposed to like William Faulkner, who's very wordy. So if you haven't read Hemingway, you should give him a try sometime. So today we're getting right to the reading, which is chapter 11 of A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. It's hilarious. It's satirical. He was great at biting social commentary and things like that. And this book is just full of it. So chapter 11. Chapter 11, The Yankee in Search of Adventures. And again, if you're new here, this gets edited into an audiobook and reposted as a full audiobook when I'm done. Then we move on to the next one. So far, I've done Pride and Prejudice, Persuasion, The Call of the Wild, A Christmas Carol, and a lot of short stories and stuff. So anyway, if you like classic literature, you like audiobooks and stuff like that, you've come to the right place. Okay, we'll start over. Chapter 11, The Yankee in Search of Adventures. There never was such a country for wandering liars, and they were of both sexes. Hardly a month went by without one of these tramps arriving, and generally loaded with a tale about some princess or other wanting help to get her out of some faraway castle where she was held in captivity by a lawless scoundrel, usually a giant. Now, you would think that the first thing the king would do after listening to such a novelette from an entire stranger would be to ask for credentials. Yes, and a pointer or two as to the locality of the castle, best route to it, and so on. But nobody ever thought of so simple and common sense a thing at that. No, everybody swallowed these people's lies whole and never asked a question of any sort or about anything. Well, one day, when I was not around, one of these people came along. It was a she one this time, and told a tale of the usual pattern. Her mistress was a captive in a vast and gloomy castle, along with 44 other young and beautiful girls, pretty much all of them princesses. They had been languishing in that cruel captivity for 26 years. The masters of the castle were 3 stupendous brothers, each with 4 arms and 1 eye, the eye in the center of the forehead as big as a fruit. Sort of fruit not mentioned, their usual slovenliness in statistics. Would you believe it? The king and the whole round Would you believe it? The king and the whole round table were in raptures over this preposterous opportunity for adventure. Every knight of the table jumped for the chance and begged for it. But to their vexation and chagrin, the king conferred it upon me, who had not asked for it at all. By an effort, I contained my joy when Clarence brought me the news. But he could not contain his. His mouth gushed delight and gratitude in a steady discharge, delight in my good fortune, gratitude to the king for his splendid mark of his favor upon me. He could neither keep his legs nor his body still, but pirouetted about the place in an airy ecstasy of happiness. On my side, I could have cursed the kindness that conferred upon me this benefaction, but I kept my vexation under the surface for policy's sake, and did what I could to let on to be glad. Indeed, I said I was glad, and in a way it was true. I was glad as a person is when he is scalped. Well, one must make the best of things and not waste time with useless fretting, but get down to business and see what can be done. In all lies there is wheat among the chaff. I must get at the wheat in this case, so I sent for the girl, and she came. She was a comely enough creature, and soft and modest, but if signs went for anything, she didn't know as much as a lady's watch. I said, My dear, have you been questioned as to particulars? She said she hadn't. Well, I didn't expect you had, but I thought I would ask to make sure. It's the way I've been raised. Now, you mustn't take it unkindly if I remind you that we don't know you. Now, you mustn't take it unkindly if I remind you that as we don't know you, we must go a little slow. You may be all right, of course, and we'll hope that you are, but to take it for granted isn't business. You understand that? I'm obliged to ask you a few questions. Just answer up fair and square and don't be afraid. Where do you live? Where where do you live when you're at home? In the land of motor, fair sir. Land of motor. I don't remember hearing of that before. Parents living? As to that, I know not if they be yet alive, sith as many years that I've lain shut up in the castle. Name, please. I am. Uh, I'm the Demoiselle Alessandre Lacartalois. Alessandre Lacartalois, and it please you. Do you know anybody here who can identify you? That were not likely, fair lord, I being come hither now for the first time. Have you brought any letters, any documents, any proofs that you are trustworthy and truthful? Of a surety no, and wherefore should I? Have I not a tongue, and cannot I say all that myself? But you're saying it, and somebody else is saying it is different. Different. How might that be? I fear I don't understand. Don't understand. Land of why why, great Scott, can't you understand a little thing like that? Can't you understand the difference between your why? Can't you understand the difference between your why do you look so innocent and idiotic? In a truth, I know not, but an it were the will of God. Yes, yes, I reckon that's about the size of it. Don't mind my seeming excited. I'm not. Let's change the subject. Now, as to this castle with 45 princesses in it, and oh, sorry. Let's see. Let me go back. Yes, yes, I reckon that's about the size of it. Don't mind my getting excited. I'm not. Let's change the subject. Now, as to this castle with 45 princesses in it and 3 ogres at the head of it, tell me, where is this harem? Harem? The castle, you understand. Where's the castle? Oh, as to that, it's great and strong and well beseen and lieth in a far country. Yes, it's many leagues. How many? Ah, fair sir, it were wordily hard to tell, there's so many, so do so lap the one upon the other, and being all made in the same image, and tainted with the same color, one may not know the one league from its fellow, nor how to count 'em, except they be taken apart. And and ye wit and ye wit well it were God's work to do that, being not within man's capacity. For ye will note, hold on, never mind about the distance. Whereabouts does the castle lie? What's the direction from here? Ah, please you, sir, it hath no direction from here. My reason that the road lieth not straight, but turneth evermore. Wherefore the direction of its place abideth not, but is some time under the one sky, and anon under another. Whereso if ye be minded, that's Whereso if ye be minded that it's in the east and went thitherward, ye shall observe that the way of the road doth yet again turn upon itself by the space of a half a circle. And this marvel happen again, and yet again, and still again, and it'll grieve you that you had thought by vanities of the mind to thwart and bring to naught the will of him that giveth not a castle a direction from a place except it pleaseth him. And if it please him not, will the rather that even all castles in all directions thereto vanish out of the earth, leaving the places wherein they tarried desolate and vacant, so warning his creatures that where he will, and where he will not, oh, that's all right. That's all right. Give us a rest. Never mind about the direction. Hang the direction. I beg pardon. I beg 1,000 pardons. I'm not well today. Pay no attention when I soliloquize. It's an old habit, an old bad habit, and hard to get rid of when one's digestion is all disordered with eating food that was raised forever and ever before it was born. Good land. A man can't keep his functions regular on spring chickens 1,300 years old. But come, never mind that. Let's, have you got such a thing as a map of the region about you? Now, a good map, is it peradventure that manner of thing of which late the unbelievers have brought from over the great seas, which being boiled in oil and an onion and salt added thereto, doth what? A map? What are you talking about? Don't you know what a map is? There, never mind. Don't explain. I hate explanations. They fog a thing up so you can't tell anything about it. Run along, dear. Good day. Show her the way, Clarence. Let's see. Oh, well, it was reasonably plain now why these donkeys didn't prospect these liars for details. It may be that this girl had a fact in her somewhere, but I don't believe you could have sluiced it out with a hydraulic, nor got it from the earlier forms of blasting. Nor got it with the earlier forms of blasting, even. It was a case for dynamite. Why, she was a perfect ass, and yet the king and his knights had listened to her as if she had been a leaf out of the gospel. It kind of sizes up the whole party. And think of the simple ways of this court. This wandering wench hadn't any more trouble to get access to the king and his palace than she would have had to get into the poorhouse in my day and country. In fact, he was glad to see her, glad to hear her tale. With that adventure of hers to offer, she was as welcome as a corpse is to a coroner. Just as I was ending up these reflections, Clarence came back. I remarked upon the barren result of my efforts with the girl, hadn't got hold of a single point that could help me to find the castle. The youth looked a little surprised or puzzled or something, and intimated that he had been wondering to himself what I had wanted to ask the girl all those directions for. Why, great guns, I said, don't I want to find the castle? How else would I go about it? Ah, sweet your lordship, one may lightly answer that, I ween. She'll go with thee. She always do. She'll ride with thee. Ride with me? Huh, nonsense. But of a truth she will. She'll ride with thee. Thou shalt see. What? She she browse around the hills and scour the woods with me alone, and I as good as engaged to be married? Why, it's scandalous. Think how it would look. My, the dear face that rose before me. The boy was eager to know all about this tender matter. I swore him to secrecy and then whispered her name, Puss Flanagan. He looked disappointed and said he didn't remember the Countess, how natural it was for the little courtier to give her a rank. He asked me where she lived. In East Hart. I came to myself and stopped, a little confused. Then I said, never mind. I'll tell you some other time. And might you see her? Would I let him see her some day? It was but a little thing to promise, 1,300 years or so, and he so eager, so I said, yes. But I sighed. I couldn't help it. And yet there was no sense in the sighing, for she wasn't born yet. But that is the way we're made. We don't reason where we feel, we just feel. My expedition was all the talk that day and that night, and the boys were very good to me and made much of me and seemed to have forgotten their vexation and disappointment and come to be as anxious for me to hive those ogres and set those ripe old virgins loose as if it were they themselves that had the contract. Well, they were good children, but just children, that's all. And they gave me no end of points about how to scout for giants and how to scoop them in, and they told me all sorts of charms against enchantments and gave me salves and other rubbish to put in my wounds. But it never occurred to one of them to reflect that if I was such a wonderful necromancer as I was pretending to be, I ought not need salves or instructions or charms against enchantments, and least of all, arms and armor on a foray of any kind, even against fire-spouting dragons, the devils hot from perdition, let alone such poor adversaries as these I was after, these commonplace ogres of the back settlements. I was to have an early breakfast and start at dawn, for that was the usual way. But I had the demon's own time with my armor, and this delayed me a little. It's troublesome to get into, and there's so much detail. First, you wrap a layer or two of blanket around your body for a sort of cushion to keep for a sort of cushion and to keep off the cold iron. Then you put on your sleeves and shirt of chain mail. These are made of small steel links woven together, and they form a fabric so flexible that if you toss your shirt onto the floor, it slumps into a pile like a peck of wet fish net. It's very heavy, and is nearly the uncomfortablest. It is very heavy and nearly the most uncomfortable material in the world for a nightshirt. Yet plenty used it for that. Tax collectors and reformers and one-horse kings with a defective title and those sorts of people. Then you put on your shoes, flat boats roofed over with interleaving bands of steel, and screw your clumsy spurs into the heels. Next, you buckle your greaves onto your legs and your cuirass on your thighs. Then come up your back plate and your breastplate. Then come your back plate and your breastplate, and you begin to feel crowded. Then you hitch onto the breastplate and the half petticoat of broad, overlapping bands of steel which hang down in front but is scalloped out behind so you can sit down. And it isn't any real improvement on an inverted coal scuttle, either for looks or for wear, or to wipe your hands on. Next, you belt on your sword. Then you put your stovepipe joints onto your arms, your iron gauntlets into your hands, your iron rat trap onto your head with a rag of steel web hitched onto it to hang over the back of your neck, and there you are, snug as a candle in a candle mold. This is no time to dance. Well, a man that is packed away like that is a nut that isn't worth the cracking. There is so little of the meat when you get down to it by comparison with the shell. The boys helped me, or I never could have got in. Just as we finished, Sir Bedivere happened in, and I saw that, like as not, I hadn't chosen the most convenient outfit for a long trip. How stately he looked, and tall and broad and grand. He had on his head a conical steel casque that only came down to his ears, and for visor only had a narrow steel bar that extended down to his upper lip and protected his nose. And all the rest of him, from neck to heel, was flexible chain mail, trousers and all. But pretty much all of him was hidden under his outside garment, which, of course, was chain mail, as I said, and hung straight from his shoulders to his ankles, and from his middle to the bottom, both before and behind, was divided, and so that he could ride and let the skirts hang down on each side. He was going grailing, and it was just the outfit for it, too. I would have given him a good deal for that ulster, but it was too late now to be fooling around. The sun was just up. The king and court were all on hand to see me off and wish me luck, so it wouldn't be etiquette for me to tarry. You don't get on your horse yourself. But you don't get on your horse yourself. No. If you tried it, you would get disappointed. They'd carry you out, just as they carry a sunstruck man in a drugstore, and put you on and help get you to rights and fix your feet in the stirrups, and all the while you do feel so strange and stuffy and like somebody else, like somebody that has been married on a sudden or struck by lightning or something like that and hasn't quite fetched around yet and is sort of numb and can't just get his bearings. Then they stood up the mast they call a spear in its socket by my left foot, and I gripped it with my hand. Lastly, they hung my shield around my neck, and it was all complete and ready to get up anchor and get to sea. Everybody was as good to me as they could be, and a maid of honor gave me the stirrup cup her own self. There was nothing more to do now, but for that damsel to get up behind me on a pillion, which she did, and put an arm around me around me to hold on. And so we started, and everybody gave us a goodbye and waved their handkerchiefs or helmets, and everybody we met going down the hill and through the village was respectful to us, except some shabby little boys on the outskirts. They said, "Oh, what a guy," and hove clods at us. In my experience, boys are the same in all ages. They don't respect anything. They don't care for anything or anybody. They said, "Go up, bald head," to the prophet going his unoffending way in the gray of antiquity. They sass me in the holy gloom of the Middle Ages, and I had seen them act the same way in Buchanan's administration. I remember because I was there and helped. The prophet had his bears and settled with the boys, and I wanted to get down and settle with mine, but I and I wanted to get down and settle with mine, but it wouldn't answer because I couldn't have got up again. I hate a country without a derrick. But that is chapter 2. Or I'm sorry, 11. What am I saying? Chapter 2. I'm thinking of reading a second chapter. Let's see how long this one is. Chapter 12. Slow tour. This is pretty short, so I'll do chapter 12 as well. All right. Chapter 12. Slow torture. Straight off, we were in the country. It was most lovely and pleasant in those sylvan solitudes in the early cool morning, in the first freshness of autumn. From hilltops we saw fair green valleys lying spread out below, with streams winding through them, and island groves of trees here and there, and huge lonely oaks scattered about, and casting black blots of shade. And beyond the valleys we saw the range of hills, blue with haze, stretching away in billowy perspective to the horizon, with at wide intervals a dim fleck of white or gray on a wave summit, which we knew was a castle. We crossed broad natural lawns sparkling with dew, and we moved like spirits, the cushioned turf giving out no sound of footfall. We dreamed along through glades in a mist of green light that got its tint from the sun-drenched roof of leaves overhead, and by our feet the clearest and coldest of runlets went frisking and gossiping over its reefs and making a sort of whispering music, comfortable to hear. And at times we left the world behind and entered into the solemn great deeps and rich gloom of the forest, where furtive wild things whisked and scurried by and were gone before you could even get your eye on the place where the noise was made, and where only the earliest birds were turning out and getting to business, with a song here and a quarrel yonder and a mysterious far-off hammering and a drumming for worms on a tree trunk away somewhere in the impenetrable remoteness of the woods. And by we would swing again into the glare. About the third or fourth or fifth time that we swung out into the glare, it was along there somewhere, a couple of hours or so after sunup. It wasn't as pleasant as it had been. It was beginning to get hot. This was quite noticeable. We had a very long pull after that without any shade. Now, it's curious how progressively little frets grow. Now, it's curious how progressively little threats grow. Dang it. I am butchering this thing. Now, it is curious how progressively little frets grow and multiply after once they get a start. Things which I didn't mind at all at first, I began to mind now, and more too all the time. The first 10 or 15 times I wanted my handkerchief, I didn't seem to care. I got along and said, never mind, it isn't any matter, and dropped it out of my mind. But now it was different. I wanted it all the time. It was nag, right along, and no rest. I couldn't get it out of my mind. And so at last I lost my temper and said, hang a man that would make a suit of armor without any pockets in it. You see, I had my handkerchief in my helmet and some other things, but it was that kind of helmet that you can't take off by yourself. That hadn't occurred to me when I put it there, and in fact, I didn't know it. I supposed it would be particularly convenient there. And so now the thought of its being there so handy and close by, and yet not get-atable, made it the worse and the harder to bear. Yes, the thing you can't get is the thing that you want mainly. Everyone has noticed that. Well, it took my mind off from everything else, took it clear off and centered it in my helmet. And mile after mile, there it stayed, imagining the handkerchief, picturing the handkerchief. And it was bitter and aggravating to have the salt sweat keep trickling down into my eyes, and I couldn't get at it. It seems like a little thing on paper, but it was not a little thing at all. It was the most real kind of misery. I would not say it if it had not been so. I made up my mind that I would carry along a reticle next time. Let it look how it might, and people say what they would. Of course, these iron dudes of the round table would think it's scandalous and maybe raise shield about it. But as for me, give me comfort first and style afterwards. So we jogged along, and now So we jogged along, and now and then we struck a stretch of dust, and it would tumble up in clouds and get in my nose and make me sneeze and cry. And of course, I said things I oughtn't to have said. I don't deny that. I'm not better than the others. We wouldn't seem to, we couldn't seem to meet anybody in this lonesome Britain, not even an ogre. And in the mood I was in then, and in the mood I was in then, it was all for the ogre. That is, an ogre with a handkerchief. Most knights would have thought of nothing but getting his armor. But so I got his bandana. He couldn't keep his hard. Um, but so I got his bandana. He could keep his hardware for all of me. Meantime, it was getting hotter and hotter in there. You see, the sun was beating down and warming up the iron more and more all the time. Well, when you're hot that way, every little thing irritates you. When I trotted, I rattled like a crate of dishes, and that annoyed me. Moreover, I couldn't seem to stand that shield slatting and banging. Moreover, I couldn't seem to stand that shield slatting and banging, now about my breast, now about my back. And if I dropped into a walk, my joints creaked and screeched in that wearisome way that a wheelbarrow does. And as we didn't create any breeze at that gate, I was like to get fried in that stove. And besides, the quieter you went, the heavier the iron settled down on you and the more and more tons you seemed to weigh every minute. And you had to always be changing hands and passing your spear over to the other over to the other foot. It got so irksome for one hand to hold it for a long time. Well, when you perspire in that way in rivers, there comes a time when you itch. You're inside, your hands are outside, so there you are, nothing but iron in between. It's not a light thing, let it sound as it may. First, it's in one place, then another, then some more, and it goes on spreading and spreading, and at last the territory is all occupied, and nobody can imagine what you feel like nor how unpleasant it is. And when it had got to the worst, and it seemed to me that I couldn't stand anything more, a fly got in through the bars and settled on my nose. And the bars were stuck and wouldn't work, and I couldn't get the visor up, and I could only shake my head, which was baking hot by this time. And the fly, well, you know how a fly acts when he's got a certainty. He only minded the shaking enough to change from. I've been in this situation before, and it's just so funny. He only minded the shaking enough to change from nose to lip and lip to ear and buzz all around in there and keep on lighting and biting and in a way that a person already so distressed as I was simply could not stand. So I gave in and got Alessandre to unship the helmet and relieve me of it. Then she emptied the conveniences out of it and fetched it full of water, and I drank and then stood up, and she poured the rest down inside the armor. One cannot think how refreshing it was. She continued to fetch and pour until I was well soaked and thoroughly comfortable. It was a good place to have a rest and peace, but nothing is quite perfect in this life at any time. I had made a pipe a while back, and also some pretty fair tobacco. Not the real thing, but what some of the Indians use. The inside bark of the willow dried. These comforts had been in the helmet, and now I had them again, but no matches. Gradually, as the time wore along, one annoying fact was borne upon my understanding, that we were weather-bound. An armed novice cannot mount his horse without help, and plenty of it. Sandy was not enough for me anyway. We had to wait until somebody should come along. Waiting in silence would have been agreeable enough, for I was full of matter for reflection and wanted to give it a chance to work. I wanted to try and think out how it was that rational or even half-rational men could have ever learned to wear armor, considering its inconveniences, and how they managed to keep up such a fashion for generations when it was plain that what I had suffered today had been when it was plain that what I had suffered today, they had had to suffer all the days of their lives. I wanted to think that out. And moreover, I wanted to think out some way to reform this evil and persuade the people to let the foolish fashion die out. But thinking was out of the question in the circumstance. But thinking was out of the question in the circumstances. You couldn't think where Sandy was. She was a quite biddable creature and good-hearted, and she had a flow of talk that was steady as a mill and made your head soar like the drays and wagons in a city. If she had had a cork, she would have been a comfort, but you can't cork that kind. They would die. Her clack was going all day. And you would think something would surely happen to her works by and by, but no. They never got out of order, and they never had to slack up for words. She could grind and pump and churn and buzz by the week and never stop to boil up or blow up, and never stop to boil up or blow out. And yet the results was just nothing but wind. She never had any ideas any more than a fog has. She was a perfect blatherskite. I mean, for jaw, talk, jabber, 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 but just as good as she could be. I hadn't minded her meal that morning on account of having that hornet's nest of other troubles. But more than once in the afternoon, I had to say, "Take a rest, child. The way you're using up all the domestic air, the kingdom will have to go to importing it by tomorrow, and it's a low enough treasury without that." So that was chapter 12, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Thank you very much for watching. If you're watching live or catching the replay, thank you, and I hope you'll subscribe. If you like classic literature, you're going to like it here. So welcome, and thank you very much for watching. Talk to you soon.